Hi everyone! Hope that everyone's enjoying the winter holiday season. I do a holiday card illustration every year, so I figured it'd be a great opportunity to do a time lapse of this year's drawing. This time I wanted to include a little commentary so you can learn about my drawing process. So let's dive in.
Let's go have some fun.
This is actually a recording of one of my streams. That's why you see all the little banners on the bottom and my cat in the corner drawing the picture for me. I do stream on a weekly basis, so you can usually catch me on Friday afternoons Pacific time on my Twitch channel. I use the same username as I do here, which is CryoFlower. I'm starting out by doing a structural sketch pass on top of my initial drawing. I tend to do a lot of sketch layers, with my first one for gesture and composition, and my second one for anatomy, volume, and etc. I also usually do a third sketch layer, which you can see here. I usually use these as guidelines for facial structure, symmetry, and difficult details like hands. If you're curious about these characters, they're from a webcomic that I'm working on right now. It's called Ash in the Wind, and I'm hoping to launch it next spring. It's a paranormal romance about two college classmates, Neil and Alexis, who get lost in the woods while investigating a local legend. I'll be revealing more about the story as time goes on, but if you like what you hear and want to know more, I upload all finished pages to my $5 tier on Patreon and production art to my $10 tier. I also have a $1 tier where I post doodles and sketches if you just want to support me. If you can't pledge anything, that's totally fine. Even if you just give it a read after it launches, it would still mean the world to me. Regardless, I'm very grateful for your support, no matter what form it comes in. Now I'm drawing in the background, which is just a snowy forest at night. I'm basing it off photos I took during various hiking trips, as well as images from a search engine. At this point, I try to finalize as many compositional elements as possible to make sure everything's working before I start line art. Line art is a pretty straightforward process for me. I'm using the Hairpin Sable dry brush from Frendon's Clip Studio Paint brush pack, and I draw using a Wacom 24-inch Cintiq. Personally, I find that I ink the best when I have a very clear sketch underneath. That way, I can put all of my mental energy into making neat lines and communicating form. I'm not one of those artists who can jump straight into line art from a messy sketch, but I'm really jealous of people who can. I actually used to really struggle with inking. Over time, I found out it was just because my drawing construction skills weren't very good. Because my structure was bad, my lines on top didn't hold up well either. I find that the quality of your lines matters much less than the structure underneath. There are a lot of artists out there who ink with very messy lines, but they're so good at drawing that the form still reads really well. I'll usually do a few extra sketches as I ink just to make sure everything looks correct. For the inking style I'm using for my comic, I like to use thicker lines and fill in some spots with black shadows. This helps convey volume without needing to rely as much on shading. I spent a lot of time testing out different coloring and inking styles for the comic. I wanted to see which ones would provide the best results using the least amount of time and work. This comic's plot isn't extremely long. It's about the length of a lot of graphic novels. Once it's done, it'll probably only take about 2 or 3 hours to read it from cover to cover. Even with those limitations, this comic will still probably take me around 2 years to finish, maybe even more. It was really important to me to pick out a drawing style that wouldn't cause me to burn out or injure myself. And I also wanted to avoid restarting my comic to avoid adding extra time. I'm lucky that webcomics have been around for over a decade now. I've had many other artists' wisdom and mistakes to learn from. I really encourage other artists starting their own comics to do your research too. Chances are, someone else has already tried a project similar to your own. After I finish inking, I start coloring. I usually do a very rough pass at getting everything looking similar to the final product in terms of overall color palette. At the bare minimum, I first pick a background color that I think will represent the overall color scheme the best. Then I decide on what color I want to use for the shadows. I also throw on whatever adjustment layers and gradient maps I think I'll need at the end. Then, I roughly scribble out the background so that I can get an idea of how it'll affect the lighting and shadows. Once I'm happy with how it looks at a distance, I go and refine the shading. As you can see, I play around with color sliders a lot. Since color is all relative, I find the sliders can be really helpful when you're trying to pick out colors in extreme lighting conditions. For example, it can be hard to pick out a good color for the night sky if you're just using the color wheel. But using the sliders, you can adjust it to be a little darker, a little lighter, a little more saturated, a little less saturated, a little more green, a little more purple, etc. I'm cleaning up all my shadows properly now and adding some highlights and even some bounce light from the snow for a little bit of extra ambience and volume. Now I'm drawing the trees in the background. This is actually my second attempt. I really didn't like how they came out on my first try. They're really tough to simplify. My comic is really dependent on backgrounds, but they can take up a lot of time. I don't have the option to just cut out backgrounds completely, so I try to convey as much as I can using the least amount of lines, detail, and color as possible. Now that I've filled in the flat colors and shadow, I still feel like the background is a bit distracting. I'm using a bunch of effects to decrease the contrast and make it darker so that my characters stand out more. I've even added a little bit of a rim light to make them pop more. I also adjusted the color curves a bit on my characters to add some warmth to their skin, so they don't look too pale. This can happen really easily when you're working with too many cool colored layer effects. Now I'm testing out some snow and snowflake brushes I downloaded from the Clip Studio Paint asset store. There are a ton of great free pre-made textures, brushes, and even 3D models on there, so I encourage everyone to check them out. After choosing a font that I'm happy with, this card is ready to go. I made this card to send out to friends and family, but I'm also sending them out as a gift to anybody who pledges to my $5 or $10 tiers on Patreon. You'll get these in addition to a cute little sticker and the rest of the tier benefits. That's all from me for now. Hope you all have a wonderful holiday and a lovely new year.